In the hills west of Luxor, in 2025, a team of archaeologists stood at the bottom of a long descending stone staircase, staring at a doorway packed solid with dried mud and broken limestone. They had been digging in this dry desert valley for years, brushing dust off the same brown rock, expecting nothing more than the modest burial of some forgotten queen. Then they cleared the last of the debris from the flooded passage, and the air changed. This corridor was too grand, too steep, too royal for a wife or a daughter. The plaster on the walls still carried faint blue stars. The seal on this place had held for roughly 3,500 years, longer than almost anything human hands have ever left untouched. And inside, they did not find the woman they were looking for. They found a lost king. They found a pharaoh whose tomb had vanished from every map and every record. And the deeper they looked, the more they began to suspect something stranger still. This empty royal tomb might not be his real one. A second tomb, possibly untouched, may still be hidden in the rock, just a short walk away. Welcome back to Bedrock. This is the channel where we dig into the discoveries that rewrite the textbooks, the moments when the ground gives up a secret nobody alive was supposed to see. Today I want to walk you through three things. First, why finding a brand new Royal Egyptian tomb in the modern age is supposed to be impossible. Second, the slow, patient excavation that turned a presumed queen into a missing pharaoh. And third, the part that keeps me up at night, the strong evidence that this king was moved, and that his treasure may be sitting under a deliberate pile of rubble, waiting. So grab whatever you drink while you watch, settle in, and let me show you the tomb that wasn't supposed to exist. Let me set the stakes, because the scale of this matters. For most of the last century, the unofficial rule among Egyptologists was simple. The big royal tombs were all found. The Valley of the Kings had been mapped, dug, photographed, and emptied. The last time anyone opened the sealed tomb of an Egyptian pharaoh was in 1922, when Howard Carter pushed a candle through a small breach and saw the gold of Tutankhamun glittering in the dark. That was over 100 years ago. Generations of archaeologists came and went without finding another. The desert seemed finished. So, who was the king at the center of this new find? His name was Thutmose II, the fourth pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. He ruled only a short time, and history tends to skip past him, because he was overshadowed by the towering figure beside him. His wife and half-sister was Hatshepsut, one of the few women ever to rule Egypt as a full pharaoh, a king in her own right. Thutmose II was the husband of a legend, and for 3,500 years, his final resting place was a total blank. We had his mummy. We never had his tomb. The dig itself began without any fireworks. Back in 2022, the British and Egyptian team, working under the Supreme Council of Antiquities and the New Kingdom Research Foundation, located a tomb entrance and a main corridor in a remote desert valley west of the Valley of the Kings. The valley has a name that sounds almost too fitting: the Wadi Gabanat El Khurud, the Valley of the Monkeys, part of the wider stretch of canyons known as the Western Wadis. The dig was led by the Scottish archaeologist Piers Litherland, who had spent more than a decade combing these dry-side valleys for anything the earlier expeditions had missed. The entrance itself was logged with the plain label C4, a catalog code, not a headline. The first read on the site was cautious. The carved doorway and descending staircase sat near the burial places of royal wives, close to Hatshepsut's own original cliff tomb. So the working assumption was reasonable and quiet. This was probably the resting place of a queen or a royal woman, not a king. For 2 years they worked that theory, clearing a flooded staircase and a corridor choked with debris and collapsed rock. It was slow, dirty, careful work, the kind that never makes the news. Then came the moment that flipped everything. Among the rubble, they began pulling out fragments of alabaster, pale carved stone jars, and on those broken vessels were inscriptions. The hieroglyphs named a deceased king, Thutmose II, set beside the name of Hatshepsut. Other shards carried Hatshepsut's living name and a written blessing wishing her life, a detail that helped the team lock down the timeline of the burial. These carved jar fragments were the first objects ever found that could be tied directly to his interment. The presumed queen's tomb had just become the lost tomb of a pharaoh, the first royal Egyptian tomb identified since Tutankhamun. The valley wasn't finished after all. But here's where the story turns strange, and where the celebration cooled into a real mystery. When the team finally pushed through into the burial chamber itself, they found almost nothing. No golden mask, no nested coffins, no mounded treasure of the kind that made Tutankhamun a household name. The royal tomb of Thutmose II was, for the most part, empty. The walls still held traces of decoration, fragments of a blue-painted ceiling, scattered with yellow stars, and passages from a funerary text called the Amduat, the kind of guide to the underworld reserved for kings. There was blue-painted plaster, too, the remains of a chamber that had once been finished with real care. But the body was gone. The grave goods were gone. So what happened? The answer is written into the stone in the form of damage. The team found clear evidence that this tomb had flooded, and not gently. Water had poured in and torn through the chamber, because the entrance had been cut directly beneath a point where rare desert rains funnel down the cliffs like a seasonal waterfall and pour straight into the corridor. And the flooding came early, within about 6 years of the king being laid to rest. Much of the original plaster had peeled away from the walls, and the painted fragments the team recovered had been knocked loose and buried in the very debris they spent 2 years clearing. A brand new royal tomb, ruined almost as soon as it was sealed. So the investigation shifted from where is the tomb to what on earth happened here. And the picture the team pieced together is remarkable. They believe that after the flood damaged the burial, the ancient Egyptians did not simply abandon their dead king. They came back. The evidence suggests the original contents of the tomb, the coffin, the body, the funerary equipment, were deliberately removed and relocated in antiquity, carried out of the ruined chamber, and taken somewhere safer and drier. This was not robbery. This was rescue. Priests and workmen, acting on the orders of the living, recovering a pharaoh from a flooded grave. Think about the logistics of that. You are moving a king, with all the ritual and secrecy that demands, through narrow desert passages, to a new hiding place. The team even found evidence of the effort that went into protecting and sealing the area afterward. Workers packed in layers of plaster and limestone flakes, shielding the site and, in the process, burying it so thoroughly that it slipped out of memory entirely. For 35 centuries, nobody knew this corridor was here, which raises the obvious question. If they carried the king out, where did they carry him to? Because the empty tomb, it turned out, was only half the story. Litherland and his team came to a conclusion that sounds almost too good to be true, and they have been careful to frame it as a hypothesis under active investigation, not a done deal. Their belief is this: the flooded tomb we have been describing was never meant to be Thutmose II's permanent home. It was his first burial, the one that failed. There should be a second tomb, a reburial, the place the ancient rescue team actually moved him to after the water ruined the original. And if that second tomb exists, and if it was sealed and hidden well enough to survive untouched, then it might still hold what the first one lost: the coffin, the grave goods, possibly the intact treasure of an 18th dynasty pharaoh. Now, I want to be honest with you about what this is and what it isn't. Nobody has opened a second tomb. Nobody has seen gold. This is a strong, evidence-backed theory built by the same people who just correctly identified a lost king from a handful of carved stone fragments. It is a hypothesis, but it is a hypothesis with a specific address. And that address is what makes my skin prickle. The team has pointed to a spot in the same desert terrain where they say there are about 23 meters of man-made layers piled up, stacked above a single point in the rock. 23 meters. That is taller than a 6-story building. An enormous heap of limestone chips, ash, mud plaster, and rubble, all carried in and placed there by human hands. Nature does not stack debris that neatly or that high, and there is a detail that makes the pile look even more deliberate. The team found signs that the ancient workers levered chunks off the cliff face above, some of those broken blocks, as large as a car, and let them crash down onto the growing mound, then cemented the whole mass in place. With poured limestone plaster, it is a disguise built like a fortress. There is even an ancient witness to the method, an official named Aneni, who served the royal family of that era, left biographies on his own tomb walls, describing how he covered royal burials with layers of mud plaster, something he claimed had never been done before. So the camouflage on this mound may match a technique recorded in writing 35 centuries ago. Somebody built this pile on purpose, at tremendous cost and labor, and the most logical reason to bury a spot under that much deliberate work is to hide something precious underneath it. Litherland has said plainly that the best candidate for what lies beneath that artificial mound is the second tomb of Thutmose II. The mission's assistant field director called the possible existence of a second, most likely intact, tomb an astonishing possibility. And if you want to understand why a single intact royal tomb matters this much, remember what Tutankhamun did to the world in 1922. A relatively minor boy king, found with his treasure intact, became the most famous pharaoh in history and reshaped how we understand ancient Egypt, all because his burial survived. An untouched tomb of Thutmose II, husband of Hatshepsut, could do the same again. It would be the first intact royal find of its kind in a century. That is the scale of what is sitting, possibly, under that pile of rubble, still sealed, still waiting. So step back and look at what this discovery really tells us, because it is bigger than one king. For 100 years, the experts believed the well of major royal tombs had run dry. The story was over. And then a patient team in a dusty side valley proved every one of those assumptions wrong. Not once, but potentially twice. The desert west of Luxor is not finished giving up its kings. It is still holding secrets that survived floods, robbers, empires, and 3,500 years of silence. The lesson here is humbling. We tend to think we have already found the important things, that the map is mostly filled in, but the ground keeps reminding us how little we have actually uncovered. There are tombs out there that no inscription mentions, rooms that appear in no ancient record, chambers waiting under ordinary-looking heaps of rock. Every confident sentence in the textbook is really just a note that says, until we dig a little deeper. And in a quiet valley near Luxor, somebody finally did. There is one detail I cannot shake. Picture the journey of this one man across time. Thutmose II died young, was laid to rest in a fine royal tomb, and within a handful of years, a flood tore that resting place apart. So his people came back and moved him, carrying their dead king to a new and secret grave. Then they buried that grave under a mountain of plaster and stone, so completely that the location dissolved from human memory. For about 35 centuries, he lay there, hidden not from us, but from the tomb robbers of his own era, protected by a disguise so good it outlasted the people who built it. He has been moved at least twice, sealed, flooded, rescued, and concealed, all to keep him safe. And if Litherland is right, he is still there, still under the rubble, a pharaoh tucked away in the rock, undisturbed, waiting for someone to finally lift the right pile of stones and let the daylight in, for the first time in 3,000 years. So here is my honest take, and I want yours. I think they are going to dig that mound, and I think they are going to find a chamber. The harder question is whether it will be intact, the way Tutankhamun was, or whether time and water and ancient thieves got there first. My gut says the sheer effort behind that 23-meter pile means the Egyptians were hiding something they badly wanted to protect, and that it is more intact than the skeptics expect. But that is just a guess, and the desert has fooled smarter people than me. So tell me in the comments, do you think the second tomb of Thutmose II is sitting intact under that rubble, full of treasure, or do you think it will turn out empty like the first? I read the replies, and I genuinely want to know where you land on this one. If discoveries like this fascinate you, the slow puzzles where the earth gives up a king nobody expected, then subscribe and stick around, because the moment that mound gets excavated and we learn what is underneath, This is exactly the channel that will break the whole story down for you, piece by piece. The desert isn't finished. Neither are we.